To Be Hero X is a show that constantly changes. It always defies expectations and jumps to the next thing before you even have time to process all of what's happened. But with that being said, I never expected it to change like this. I never expected it to seemingly go back on the themes and messages it's been developing since episode 1. And I never expected it to follow a hero who embodies the nepotism and unfairness that the show originally aimed to expose. So now, I'm left wondering, does Queen actually deserve to be a hero? Has To Be Hero X changed its core message? And does Queen ruin the entire show? Well, to figure all that out, we need to dive into Queen's character, in which she represents in comparison to the rest of the heroes we've followed thus far. First things first, there is a glaring difference between Queen and everyone else in the show, and that difference is nepotism and status. To Be Hero X has always been a show that criticizes society and the unfairness of nepotism and ill-gotten fame. It's always been about the little guy, the loser, the orphan who overcomes the odds and manages to become a hero. It shows how a regular person, no matter how unexceptional or unexpected, can become something special through the support and admiration of society alone. But Queen is nothing like that. She was born a prodigy, graduating from one of the most prestigious universities by the age of 14. And she was born into a family that had money and, more importantly, deep connections to the very agency that she would soon be recruited by. From Queen's birth, everything was set up for her to become a hero. In a way, she embodies the privilege that comes from unfair opportunities that the vast majority of the world will never be granted. In fact, I see her main enemy, Boa, as a much more heroic character, and one that is far more in line with what To Be Hero X has been portraying up until now. Because Boa wasn't talented, she wasn't handed opportunities. She worked tirelessly to better herself and make opportunities appear from thin air. You can argue that she became a hero the right way, like Linling, Yang Cheng, and Cyan, while Queen did not. And that's part of the crucial difference between Queen and everyone else. Queen became a hero because she wanted to, not to save Moon like Linling or Pomelo like Yang Cheng. At least as far as we know, her desire for fame and power is out of her own drive and ego alone, which I want to make clear, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but it is very contradictory to what To Be Hero X has stood for up until now, because Queen seems to treat her supporters and fans as nothing more than pawns in a game. She talks about the purposes behind her speeches and the effects her achievements and words have on society with practically no emotion, like it's all just a game to her, and she doesn't actually believe a word that she says. However, despite all of this, despite the privilege, the talent, and the nepotism that Queen is blessed with, she still had to work extremely hard and continues to work hard. Even if she doesn't believe in the messages behind her speeches and interviews, she clearly does believe in herself and has a sense of discipline and determination that probably surpasses even Boa's. And that's the difficult thing about her character. I want to criticize her for how easy her situation is and how little she had to do, but that's just not accurate. Queen never took it easy. She never relied on outside support rather than hard work. So much so that I think it's pretty likely that even if she had been born without any connections or guidance, she still would have eventually become a hero, even if she wasn't the record-breaking child prodigy we all know her as. And it was upon that realization that I started to better understand what To Be Hero X is trying to convey through her character. Since the beginning, the show has been realistic. It hasn't been afraid to expose the dark side of pop culture or the corruption within management agencies. So it would be ingenuine for the show to never showcase something as prevalent and inherent as nepotism. But by making Queen the receiver of this nepotism, To Be Hero X is able to illustrate the role and power of birthright in society by giving it to the single person who is most deserving of it. And I actually think that's really cool, because we're able to see a different side of the hero industry, while not making Queen some kind of insufferable prima donna who expects everything to be given to her. She proves that not all nepo babies or people born into fortunate circumstances in general are bad or undeserving. And through this, tobeherox takes the risk of actually showcasing the pressures and hardships that come with immediately being cast into the spotlight, rather than just writing it off as good fortune and discrediting those who make use of what they're given. And that's the thing that I really like about Queen's character. It's not that she embodies nepotism or ill-gotten fame, but rather she represents the kind of person that was born not just in the spotlight, but for it. And that's why she has this almost untouchable aura about her. Like her resolve is unbreakable and she was always meant to be a hero, which is perfectly represented by her power, allowing her to slow down the time of people or objects near her, preventing them from ever touching her based on certain rules that haven't yet been revealed. In a sense, her power makes her almost invincible. The only way we've seen it be overcome has been through a loophole and X himself, which is the next thing we need to talk about. Queen's first failure in her entire life is losing to X. And obviously, this makes sense to us, because we've seen the type of powerhouse that X becomes in the future. But to Queen, the idea of X beating her seemed and should have been impossible. But by building Queen up into this monstrous and fated hero only to be embarrassed by a nobody is a beautiful way to reinforce tobehero's central theme, that anyone can be a hero, and how Queen doesn't go against that theme, but instead is just another person, like every hero we've followed so far, who is not defined in a good or bad way by their circumstances. Because ultimately, most people who are born lucky enough to have crazy expectations put on them end up not meeting them, and are solely remembered as the child of some famous actor or Hall of Fame athlete. But Queen doesn't even let that be a possibility. She takes everything into her own hands and makes the absolute most out of the cards she was dealt. Which is why I don't think Queen ruins the message and themes of tobeherox, despite her being the complete opposite of every hero we've followed so far. But the one problem I do have with Queen is her personality. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I don't see Queen as being nearly as fun or likable as characters like Linling and Cyan, but I also don't think she's meant to be, at least not yet. Because Queen has always been forced, or more accurately forced herself, to play a role. So she's never gotten to really express or be herself. It's a lot like when Linling was forced to play the role of nice. But Queen chooses to play this role, and has done it for the majority of her life, out of a pure desire to become a great hero. And even though this does seem to be her own choice, throughout the 2 episodes we've seen of Queen, I can only think of 2 times that she was ever even remotely happy. And that's when she held Big Johnny and thanked Cyan. Although this is still a far cry from actually opening up and becoming a character that the audience can relate to or appreciate. And I think the reason that Queen has failed to really be herself is because she's so obsessed with being a hero. And to really prove this, every story that we've followed so far is a cautionary tale about becoming a hero. Linling, Yang Chang, and Cyan all have their lives practically ruined, at least for some time, by becoming a hero. And both Linling and Cyan actively try to prevent themselves from becoming one. But Queen's story seems to completely disregard the burdens that come with being a hero. But I don't think that's because she doesn't face them. Instead, I think that Queen is so blinded by her desire to succeed as a hero that she doesn't even realize she's failing to be a person. And I don't know about you, but I love that concept. It's tobeherox's way of saying the same thing it's been saying all season in a completely new and fresh way. And it shows how even people born into the industry and people who are viewed as meant for it are still vulnerable to the price of being a hero. I just hope we get to see who Queen really is in the future, thanks to the friendship and support of people like Cyan and Little Johnny. I don't normally put outros, but somehow we already hit my goal of reaching 1K before the end of summer. So I just really wanted to say thank you guys for that. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe.